My name is Claire Whitman. I'm 33 years old, and up until a few months ago, I ran a cozy little cafe in a quiet Vermont town. It wasn't just any cafe, it was my grandmother's, or at least it had been. She built it from scratch in the late 60s with her bare hands and stronger will, and for a while, it was the heart of the town. When she passed, the cafe became mine, not just by inheritance, but by love. I quit a well-paying job in Boston to move back, restore the place, and pour my soul into it. I made it work. It took 3 years of sleepless nights, burned fingers, and fixing old plumbing at midnight. But eventually the cafe became something people loved again. Locals came not just for the coffee, but for what the space meant. It had warmth. It had stories. But behind the espresso machines and the morning regulars, something else was brewing. You see, my mother and her husband, my stepfather, moved in with me during the pandemic. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was the right thing to do, but as time passed, their stay turned permanent. They started calling the cafe our business. They began making suggestions, then decisions without me. Still, I didn't expect what I overheard. They called me a burden, said I was weak, easy to manipulate, that once I burned out, they'd take over the cafe entirely. So when they came back from their luxury vacation in Italy, courtesy of my generosity, they found the cafe dark, locked. Their key didn't fit. A sign hung on the door. 4 words. Simple. This burden is free now. And if you asked anyone who knew me growing up, they'd probably describe me as the reliable one. I never caused a fuss, never skipped school, never questioned what was asked of me. I was the girl who got straight A's, packed her own lunch, and helped clean up after dinner, even when no one else did. It's not because I was some perfect child. I think I just learned early that peace came easiest when you stayed small and useful. My mother, Valerie, was the kind of woman who always looked tired, even when she wasn't. She had this permanent sigh in her voice, like life itself was something she had to carry uphill every day. I remember how she used to talk about dreams, how she wanted to own a little cafe one day, back when I was too young to understand what that meant. But dreams require staying power, and my mother never had much of that. She started things, got overwhelmed, and blamed the world when they didn't pan out. My stepfather, Gary, came into our lives when I was 12. He was charming at first, always cracking jokes, calling me kiddo, and talking about how we'd be a proper family now. But behind closed doors, Gary was a different man. He believed strongly in hierarchy. If you weren't the breadwinner, you weren't the decision maker. And even if you were, it still had to be his way. He didn't like being challenged, especially by a teenage girl who quietly kept receipts literal and emotional. Then there was my grandmother, Miriam. She was my anchor, my safe place. Every summer she'd let me stay with her in her creaky old house just outside town. That house had warmth built into the floorboards. She taught me to bake cinnamon scones, to tend roses without gloves, and to never, ever let someone else decide your worth. People will try, she'd say, especially the ones who love you the least. When I was in my mid-20s, Grandma started forgetting things, then names, then how to find the kitchen. I moved back from Boston to help care for her in her final year, and when she passed, she left me the house and the cafe space attached to it. She didn't leave anything to my mother, and I'll be honest, that caused some friction, but I didn't think it would go further than bitterness. I restored the cafe with my own hands, scraped together savings, replaced ancient appliances, painted the walls myself, rebranded it, Miriam's Table in her honor. Business started slow, but it grew word of mouth, social media, and a few mentions in regional blogs. Before long, we were turning a small profit. Then came the pandemic. Like many, I was overwhelmed. I lost, staff customers vanished, and I considered closing. That's when my mother and Gary offered to help just until things stabilized. At first, I was grateful. They helped with deliveries, watched the register. But then they stayed, moved in upstairs, started inviting friends over. They made themselves comfortable in a life I'd built on top of my grandmother's legacy. It didn't happen all at once, like a slow leak. One day, Gary moved my old photo wall in the cafe to hang one of his statement pieces. My mother started telling customers she was the original founder's daughter, implying she'd started the place. I told myself it was harmless, that they just wanted to feel useful. But something was shifting. They'd never built this place, but they had already decided it was theirs. Looking back, I can't quite pinpoint the moment when things went from uncomfortable to unbearable. It was a gradual build like water warming in a pot. At first, it just felt like tension, little things that rubbed the wrong way, but didn't seem worth fighting over. A snide comment here, an innocent suggestion there. But slowly that tension calcified into something heavier, resentment, entitlement, and a quiet creeping dread that I was losing control of the very thing I had poured my life into. It started with the money. During the pandemic, my cafe took a hit like everyone else's. I had no staff, barely any foot traffic, and vendors breathing down my neck for payments. I used my own savings to keep the place afloat, applied for small business grants, launched online ordering. I even started delivering pastries to neighboring towns in my own car. I was exhausted, but I was surviving. That's when my mother offered to pitch in. She had just come into a small inheritance from a distant cousin and suggested she and Gary help pay the back rent in exchange for a little equity. I said no. It was a firm, polite no. I thanked her for the offer but told her I wasn't comfortable mixing family and ownership. She didn't argue, at least not then. She just nodded slowly like she understood, and the topic was dropped. Except it wasn't. A week later, Gary came to me with a proposal for a total rebranding. Make this place modern, he said. The name Miriam's Table is a little sleepy. How about something fresh, Grindhouse? Or Morning Fuel? Catchy, right? I told him no again. This cafe isn't about trendy slogans, I said. It's a tribute to Grandma. His smile didn't reach his eyes after that. Little by little, they began inserting themselves into every aspect of the cafe. My mother started taking meetings with vendors without telling me. She redesigned the paper menus. Gary moved the coffee grinder to a different counter, claiming it made more sense his way. They both began referring to the cafe as our business in front of customers. Our cafe has always been the heart of this town, my mother would tell tourists. Back when I was a little girl, I used to help Mama bake in that very oven. She never did. That oven was bought just a year ago, and she barely baked. I tried to talk to them. I really did. I set aside a Sunday afternoon, made tea, and said calmly, I appreciate your help, but we need to reestablish some boundaries. This is my business. I need to make the final decisions. My mother set her cup down harder than necessary. Claire, we're just trying to help. No one's trying to take anything from you. Gary chuckled. Yeah, kiddo, you've been looking real tired lately. Thought you'd want the support. I dropped the conversation. What was the point? But after that day, they became more careful. Their words got sweeter, their smiles wider, but the control they exerted became more subtle and more total. They started tracking the numbers, asked for access to the point of sale system. Just in case anything happened to you, Gary said. I should have seen it then what was coming. Then came Italy. Sometime early that spring, business finally turned around. We had consistent traffic again. Tourists returned. I'd hired back 2 part-timers. There was even enough for me to take home a modest salary. It was the first time I'd breathed easily in years. That's when my mother announced that she and Gary were planning their dream trip to Tuscany, a 3-week vacation. Gary said it was to recharge after helping me for so long. My mother suggested it might be a good time for me to reflect on next steps for the cafe. I didn't ask how they could afford it. Later, I found out that they used the emergency fund I had stashed in our shared account, the account I had opened temporarily during the pandemic to streamline groceries and bills. They considered it community funds. I should have cut the cord then, but I didn't. I just quietly removed my name from that account, set up new banking, and told myself I was overreacting. Again. 3 days before their departure, Gary pulled me aside. We've been talking, he said, and I think it's time we made this place official. We should all be on the paperwork. We've invested a lot of ourselves into this business. I stared at him. You've been living here rent-free. You've never put a dollar into this cafe. Not one. Don't be petty, he said. Family doesn't keep score. That line, I had heard it before. Growing up, it was what my mother said every time she asked me to give up something I loved for the sake of the household. Don't be selfish, Claire, she'd say. Family sacrifices. What she meant was, you sacrifice, we benefit. The day they left for Italy, my mother hugged me with both arms, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Keep things running for us." Okay, for us. For the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into the cafe, reorganized, streamlined, repaired what had been neglected. I began dreaming again about hosting author readings, maybe adding a patio garden, something that was mine. And then one evening, I came downstairs to grab a notebook I'd left in the cafe. I heard the iPad still playing music from the office, but the music stopped mid-track. A FaceTime call had started and accidentally auto-answered from a synced device. The screen lit up, and there they were, my mother and Gary, sitting in a stone courtyard in Florence, laughing. Gary was mid-sentence. "Honestly, once we get back, it's time to push her harder. She's too soft, still wants our approval." "She is a burden," my mother replied. "Always has been. But she's an obedient one. Guilt does wonders. She'll crack soon. Then we can finally transfer the cafe to our name." They laughed. I stood frozen in the doorway, the soft glow of the iPad flickering like a cruel spotlight. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a sound. I just listened. And everything inside me changed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark replaying the FaceTime recording I had quietly saved to my phone. Every laugh, every calculated word echoed in my ears like a verdict. "She is a burden. She'll crack soon. Transfer the cafe to our name." It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated, cold. Like I wasn't even a person to them, just a step on the ladder. A resource. A soft-hearted fool to be squeezed dry. For a while I just sat there, staring at the screen, then at the walls, then at nothing. I remember walking to the kitchen in a daze and boiling water for tea, like muscle memory could make this moment normal. I sat at the table with a chipped mug in my hand and asked myself the hardest question I've ever asked. What am I still doing here? This cafe was never supposed to become a battlefield. It was supposed to be peace. It was supposed to be home. My grandmother's spirit was in every creak of the wood floors, every handwritten label on the jam jars, every daffodil I planted in the window boxes in early spring. But somehow, little by little, it had been overrun not just by people, but by expectations, by manipulation dressed as concern, and by a version of family that drained rather than gave. The next morning, I got in my car and drove to a neighboring town to see a lawyer named Brenda Littleton. She'd helped me incorporate the cafe when I first reopened it, and she was the kind of attorney who never wasted words or time. I slid my phone across the table and played the recording. She didn't flinch, just listened, then asked, "Are they listed anywhere on your business license?" "Lease deed, no," I said. "Nothing. The house and the cafe were left to me alone. I pay all the taxes, utilities, everything," she nodded. "Then legally, they don't have a leg to stand on. But emotionally, that's a whole different story." I asked her if there was anything they could do to claim ownership if, say, they tried to say they'd invested or co-managed. She shook her head. "Without documentation or payments, it's just noise. You're in the clear. But if you're going to act, Claire, act fast." And so I did. That evening, I went home and started a list. A detailed color-coded spreadsheet of every task I'd need to complete if I wanted to untangle myself from this entire situation. Sell the cafe, move out of the house, secure all personal documents, notify my bank, my suppliers, my accountant, disentangle their names from anything even adjacent to my life. It was the most painful spreadsheet I've ever created, and the most liberating. For 3 weeks, I worked in secret. I went to work every morning like usual, smiled at the customers, kept the scones warm and the cappuccinos creamy. I updated the books at night, cleared old inventory, and boxed up the personal things in the upstairs apartment. Every few days, I drove an hour out of town to meet with a real estate agent I trusted, Mason Bright. I told him the full story minus names. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, just got to work. "I can't list it publicly," I told him. "And I need a buyer within 6 weeks." He raised an eyebrow but nodded. "It's a good location, and your books look solid. We'll keep it quiet. But I can think of a few people." I met with a storage company and rented 2 units, one for my personal belongings and one under my mother's name. I arranged for a moving crew to come 2 days before their return from Italy. I opened a new bank account, bought a new phone, set up a new mailing address in a town 2 hours away. I was becoming untraceable by choice. One night, while sorting through my grandmother's papers, I found an envelope I hadn't noticed before. My name written in her neat, looping cursive. Inside was a letter. No date, just a single page. My Claire, if you're reading this, I trust that life has tested you, and you're standing tall in the face of it. I always knew you were stronger than you believed. Don't let anyone guilt you for doing what's necessary to protect your spirit. People will use family as a weapon when they have no more kindness to give. You owe them only what is decent, not your peace. Never trade your light to keep someone else warm. Love, Grandma. I pressed that letter to my heart, like it could anchor me to the ground. The next morning, I confirmed the sale. An older couple, quiet, kind, with a passion for small-town revival, offered a fair price and promised to keep the cafe spirit intact. They even wanted to keep the name. That mattered more to me than I can explain. On my last night in the house, I sat at the cafe's corner table with a cup of chamomile tea just like I used to with my grandmother. I looked around at everything I had built and rebuilt. It didn't feel like failure. It felt like release. Before I left, I taped a simple note to the cafe door. This burden no longer brews for you. No signature, no drama, just closure. I locked the door, dropped the keys in the old rusted mailbox out front, and I drove away. Not with bitterness, but with something closer to clarity. Leaving was both the hardest and easiest decision I'd ever made. Hard because the cafe wasn't just a building, it was memory. It was the smell of cinnamon rolls on rainy mornings. It was the way the sunlight hit the counter at 8 a.m., right when the regulars came in. It was my grandmother's voice in my head reminding me to stir with care and never serve coffee you wouldn't drink yourself. It was the life I had fought to build with my own two hands. And yet, it was also easy because staying would have meant sacrificing parts of myself I was no longer willing to offer. After the papers were signed and the sale finalized, I spent one last morning walking through the place alone. The buyers were scheduled to take possession the next day. I had until sundown to make peace with goodbye. I had already moved my belongings into storage. The only things left in the house were a few photographs, some mismatched mugs I hadn't packed, and a stack of order receipts I'd forgotten to throw out. I stood in the middle of the empty cafe, the silence louder than I expected, and felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks: grief. Not just for the business, but for the dream I had tried so hard to believe could exist within a family that never saw me as more than a means to an end. I cried, not loudly, just slow, quiet tears that rolled down without asking permission. Then I wiped them away, poured myself one final cup of coffee, and sat in the seat that used to be my grandmother's favorite. The cushions still carried the faintest trace of lavender. That's when I wrote the note. It wasn't meant to hurt them. That would have been too easy. I didn't want revenge. I wanted distance, silence, a clean break. The note wasn't a message to provoke, it was a declaration that I was done explaining myself. This burden no longer brews for you. I left it on the front door secured beneath the old open-close sign, which I flipped to closed for the last time. 2 days later, I got the first voicemail from my mother. They had returned from Italy full of wine and souvenirs, only to find the place locked dark and stripped of anything familiar. Her voice sharp and indignant. "Claire, what is going on? Why won't the key work? Where is everything?" Then Gary, more irritated than confused. "You better call us back. Immediately. This isn't funny." I didn't respond. The next day their messages escalated. Anger, confusion, then the guilt. "You can't just disappear," my mother said in the third voicemail. "We're your family. Family." The word tasted hollow. I forwarded everything to Brenda, my lawyer. She assured me again that I was under no legal obligation to house them, explain myself, or continue contact. They had no claim, not to the cafe, not to the property, not to the life I had just taken back. Still, I knew it wouldn't end with voicemails. A week later, they showed up at my former real estate agent's office, then my former cafe accountant. Then somehow they tracked down the storage facility, called, demanded answers, accused. Each time, I stayed silent. I had moved to a small rental 2 hours away. It wasn't special, just a one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store, but it was mine. No one knew where I was except Brenda and Mason. My phone number was new. My accounts were locked down. And for the first time in years, I woke up not anticipating someone else's reaction to my choices. I began to rebuild not with grand plans, but with small rituals. Morning walks to a nearby bakery, quiet evenings with library books, coffee from a thermos on a park bench instead of a barista counter. It was simple, lonely sometimes. But I wasn't drained. I wasn't cornered. That loneliness strangely felt honest. About a month into my new life, I reached out to a therapist named Dr. Lillian Shaw. She specialized in adult children of controlling families. We had our first video session on a Tuesday afternoon, and I'll never forget what she said after I told her the broad strokes of my story. She said, "What you did wasn't cruel. It was courageous. You protected the version of yourself that still believes in peace." It stunned me. I had spent so long wondering if I had overreacted, if I had cut too deep. But hearing that word protected shifted something in me. I hadn't escaped. I had chosen to stop bleeding. Dr. Shaw gave me weekly exercises to rebuild emotional boundaries, to examine patterns, to understand why I had tolerated so much for so long. I wrote letters I never sent, drew timelines of moments I had ignored, revisited memories with new language, not guilt, but clarity. Meanwhile, my mother continued sending emails, some frantic, some remorseful, all manipulative. One began, "We forgive you," as though I were the one who had committed a crime. Another suggested we rebuild the cafe together, this time as partners. That one made me laugh. I never replied. Brenda kept them on file. My silence, she said, was also a kind of statement. Eventually, they gave up. Or at least they stopped reaching out directly. But the fallout had left its mark. I stopped using my old recipes, stopped visiting the website I had built for the cafe. Even looking at coffee shop interiors online made something tighten in my chest. I didn't know if I'd ever run a cafe again, but I knew I'd never do it for people who thought I owed them everything. Still, I kept the letter my grandmother wrote. I kept it in a drawer by my bed, and some nights when I felt especially unsure, I read it again, each line reminding me that love doesn't always come from where you expect, and sometimes family is just a word people use to bypass accountability. I hadn't just sold a building, I had reclaimed my story. And no one, not even the people who raised me, had the right to write the ending for me. I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried to force a face-to-face meeting. Sure enough, about 2 months after the cafe sale was finalized, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail as I always did. But the message they left was short, sharp, and unmistakable. "Claire, we need to talk. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. The Red Maple Diner. If you don't show, we're going to your office, and this time we won't be polite." It was Gary's voice. He didn't sound angry. He sounded in control. That's how I knew he thought he still had power over me. I forwarded the message to Brenda. "Do I have to go?" I asked. "No," she said firmly. "Not unless you want to. You've done everything right. But if you think it'll give you closure, do it on your terms and record it. Public place. Witnesses." I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I dressed with intention, button-down shirt, blazer dark jeans. Not formal, not passive. I wanted to look like the woman I had become, decisive, calm, untouchable. The Red Maple Diner sat off a quiet road near the edge of town, always busy, always buzzing with conversation and coffee refills. I arrived at 10:10, deliberately late. I wanted them to know I was no longer operating on their timeline. They were already at a booth side by side facing the door. My mother looked thinner, her face drawn tight with stress. Gary looked agitated, lips pressed into a flat line. They both straightened when they saw me. I walked to the table, set my phone on the edge, face up recording, and sat down without a word. "You brought a recorder?" My mother asked, her voice sharp with offense. "No," I said calmly. "I brought protection," Gary scoffed. "We're your family, Claire, not some con artists." I didn't respond. I waited. My mother jumped in first. "You blindsided us, sold the cafe out from under us, left us with nothing. No explanation, no chance to talk. After everything we've done for you." I looked her in the eye. "Everything you've done for me, or everything you took from me." Gary leaned forward, his voice lowered. "We helped build that place back up. You helped yourselves to it," I corrected. "You made executive decisions without permission. You spent emergency funds I saved. You told people it was your cafe. And then you planned to take it entirely." My mother opened her mouth to deny it, but I lifted my phone and hit play. Their voices filled the space between us, the recording from Italy. Her saying, "She is a burden." Him saying, "She'll crack soon." Her laughter. The sound was unmistakable. When it ended, I looked up. My mother had gone pale. Gary's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "You recorded us?" she whispered. "You forgot to hang up," I said flatly. "I just didn't hang up either." They were silent. I continued, my voice steady. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to make something very clear. You will not contact me again. No more emails, no more voicemails. No more showing up at my office, my friends' places, or my accountant's door. If you do, I will file for a restraining order." "That's ridiculous," Gary snapped. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said, leaning in slightly. "I'm being done." My mother looked like she might cry, but I didn't flinch. I felt nothing but the quiet weight of finality. She tried again. "Claire, we made mistakes, but we're still your family. Family doesn't manipulate," I said. "Family doesn't plan how to take what's not theirs. You had every chance to be part of my life. You chose control over care," Gary muttered. "You think you're better than us now?" "No," I said softly. "I just finally believe I deserve better." My mother whispered, "You broke our hearts." "No," I said, "you broke mine. I just refuse to keep handing it to you." I stood, picking up my phone. "Your belongings are in storage. 6 months paid in full. After that, the unit becomes your responsibility." My mother reached for my hand. I stepped back. "I hope you find peace," I said, "but it won't be through me." And with that, I walked out. Outside, I took a deep breath. The air was cool, crisp. A breeze stirred the trees just enough to remind me that I was alive, that I was free, that I didn't need anyone's permission to take up space in the world. That conversation wasn't about changing them. It was about reclaiming me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of what they might do. I was confident in what I had done. The weeks after that final meeting felt strangely quiet. Not just around me, but inside me. Like a storm had passed and the wind no longer howled. The ache in my chest was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't raw anymore. It was something duller, heavier, but bearable. I kept going to therapy with Dr. Shaw. We started focusing less on the past and more on the patterns I had carried into adulthood. The way I apologized for things that weren't my fault. The way I tried to anticipate everyone's needs before they asked. The way I equated love with approval and peace with obedience. "I've been operating my whole life like someone trying not to be abandoned," I told her one afternoon. "You were never abandoned," she said gently. "You were conditioned to abandon yourself." That landed hard. For the first time, I let myself sit with the idea that I didn't owe anyone my loyalty just because we shared blood. That choosing peace over proximity wasn't betrayal, it was survival. I started building a life quietly on my own terms. I found a part-time job consulting with a local co-op that helped independent cafes and bakeries stay afloat. I worked with women like me, scrappy, resourceful, tired, but hopeful. I helped them rework menus, cut costs, and negotiate leases with landlords. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, real. I didn't need to own anything to feel valuable. I just needed to contribute without being consumed. In my free time, I walked, I cooked, I slept, I watched documentaries. I stopped checking my old inbox. I stopped Googling their names. I stopped looking for signs that they regretted anything. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But their remorse wasn't mine to manage anymore. I reconnected with an old friend from college, Elena, someone I had drifted from during the years I was buried in the cafe. She invited me to a weekend retreat she was helping organize for women in transition. I almost said no, but something in me whispered, say yes. That weekend changed something. They're surrounded by strangers who had all left something behind: marriages, jobs, homes, identities. I realized I wasn't alone. Every woman had a version of my story. Not all involved parents or property, but all involved boundaries. All involved walking away from something that once felt impossible to leave. We sat around a bonfire the final night and shared one sentence each. Just one thing we had learned. When it was my turn, I said I don't have to set myself on fire to keep other people warm. No one clapped, no one cried. They just nodded like they already knew. That's when I realized healing doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's quiet, a slow unfolding, a soft place inside you that was hard for so long beginning to thaw. I bought a small condo at the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a little balcony, and enough sunlight to keep a basil plant alive. I painted the walls myself. No antique decorations. No reminders of the cafe, just clean open space. It was mine. No one told me what color to choose. No one criticized my furniture or questioned how I spent my weekends. Some mornings I woke up and felt unsure, lonely even. But it was a clean loneliness, not the heavy kind that comes from being surrounded by people who pretend to love you while slowly erasing who you are. Dr. Shaw called it honest solitude. And in that solitude, I started writing, not a book, not a memoir, just pieces, notes, reflections. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but it felt good to give shape to everything that had lived in my head for so long. Words became a new kind of home. A few months later, I found myself walking past a quiet corner lot with a little sign in the window: commercial space available. It was a modest spot, used to be a florist's shop, but something about it made me stop. I didn't call the number, not yet, but I took a picture of the sign, just in case. Because healing doesn't mean never building again. It means you learn to build with stronger walls, firmer floors, and a front door that locks. A year after I closed the cafe, I drove back to the town I once called home, not to see anyone, not to reclaim anything, just to visit my grandmother's grave. I brought her favorite flowers, pale yellow tulips, and a small note folded neatly in my coat pocket. The air was crisp, the sky soft with overcast light. The cemetery was quiet, save for the wind threading through the branches above me. I sat beside her headstone, fingers brushing the edge of the stone like I was holding her hand. I did it, Grandma, I whispered, not in a triumphant way, just a steady one. I let go. I walked away. I stopped trying to earn love from people who never gave it freely. I placed the tulips carefully, then unfolded the note. It simply read, I didn't fail you. I just stopped failing myself. That was the truth. For a long time, I thought leaving meant giving up, that stepping away from family even when they hurt you was selfish, that loyalty meant endurance no matter the cost. But I understand now, and there's a kind of loyalty that isn't about staying. It's about staying true to yourself, to your peace, to the parts of you that are still tender from all the times you were asked to shrink. I used to think strength meant tolerating more than others could handle. Now I know strength is saying no more. Walking away didn't make me cruel. It made me whole. And if you're reading or listening to this and you've ever found yourself in that same space, wondering if it's okay to put up a boundary to take back your life, to stop playing the role others cast for you, let me be the one to tell you. You don't need anyone's permission to be free. The people who truly love you don't require your silence or your sacrifice to stay close. They don't call you a burden. They call you worthy. And if they don't, you are allowed to walk away, even if they're your parents, even if you love them. even if it hurts. Because some things are heavier than forgiveness, and peace is lighter than you think. Thanks for hearing my story. If it made you pause, if it reminded you of your own, leave a note below. Maybe it's time you said the words out loud too. I deserve more than survival. And you do. You always have.